tools and retain them. So it's kind of a smatter shot of things that I've been thinking about over many years. In fact, here's the agenda. We're going to do a little quiz to start to see whether you're optimizing your data analysts. So get a pen. Just to level set, how to align them. That's a really hard thing to do because most of them are embedded in departments. How to train data analysts so that they're asking the right questions and delivering the right results and delivering, as a result, strong business value. What kind of tools and technology they should be equipped with. And then you can't talk about data analysts without discussing self-service, because these are the folks that you really want to empower with self-service. But there are some ramifications that we'll talk about and some new tooling to address those ramifications. And then finally, how to retain data analysts, because once they get proficient with your data and the analytics tools, they become quite attractive to other organizations. All right, so Mike already introduced me. You may not know Eckerson Group, but we are a research consulting and advisory firm that focuses just on data and analytics. We consult with a lot of companies, help them build data strategies, modernize their data architectures, build or optimize data governance and MDM programs, establish self-service strategies that actually work, so on and so forth. So here's just a list of some of our recent clients. All right, so here's our little quiz just to get you warmed up. So thinking about your data analysts, I want you to, every time one of the statements I'm going to present applies to your organization in any shape or form, just make a mark. All right, and then we're going to add up the marks at the end. There's 15 potential marks. I will say that getting a mark is not a good thing, but that's how we're going to tabulate today. All right, so statement number 1. Our data analysts can't keep up with business requests. All right, check the box or just make a mark on your paper if that's true in your organization. Number 2, our data analysts are order takers who do not work strategically with business partners. They just do whatever they want them to do. Number 3, our data analysts build lots of disconnected dashboards, creating a fragmented view of data for business users. How are we doing so far? Number 4, many of our data analysts are glorified report writers, not really doing analysis. Number 5, our data analysts lack sufficient domain knowledge to be effective. Oh, they may know how to use Tableau or some other tool, but they don't really know your business that well, and they may not even know the data as well. Number 6, our data analysts have trouble communicating findings that business people can act on. There's a little disconnect between what the analyst says and the business person perceives, and nothing happens as a result. Number 7, our data analysts are isolated in departments and rarely interact with each other. And number 8 for this page, last one, our data analysts spend more time finding and cleaning data than analyzing it. All right, so how are we doing? Mike, how are you doing?
No comment.
Okay. All right, so let's keep going. Got one more page here. Number 9, our data analysts never rotate through departments or build cross-functional knowledge. Obviously, the more cross-functional knowledge they have of your business, the more effective they can be in answering real strategic questions. Number 10, our data analysts lack curiosity to explore data beyond actual projects. This may not be a fault of the analyst. It may be a fault of the organization that doesn't let these folks up for air. But we found that if they spend time just coursing through the data and exploring it, they can be more effective once there is a project. So they get to know that data really well, its ins and outs, where its strengths and weaknesses are, they can be more effective. Same with data scientists. Number 11, our data analysts spend more time maintaining past reports than building new ones or new analyses. Number 12, our data analysts continually reinvent the wheel and rarely reuse work from other analysts. I know that's really true. Our data analysts create more reports than they decommission, creating report sprawl. I'm sure that never happens in your organizations, right? And number 14, our analysts don't apply the right type of analysis to the business question at hand. So a lack of analytical training there. And last but not least, business people don't view our data analysts as strategic partners or resources to help them achieve their goals. All right, so how did we do? If you've got 10 to 15, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I said no comment because we work with lots of organizations, and I'm not going to call out any or incriminate, but every one of these is true in one way or another, Wayne.
Yeah.
And I think number 15 is starting to turn the corner. I think that people are starting to realize, finally, organizations are starting to realize the value of data analysts and actually bring them into their organizations. That's kind of a trend that I would say we're seeing.
Yeah, these analysts are so pivotal to making good on your analytics investments, but a lot of companies, they don't pay any attention to them because they're scattered typically throughout an organization, and there's no strategy to really manage and optimize them. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I do suspect a lot of you are in the red here because whenever we go into an organization and work with them, all of these things typically apply to one degree or another. So don't feel bad if you're in the red. Feel really good if you're in the blue. Okay, so let's just do some basic blocking and tackling here so we're on the same page. What is a data analyst? They actually have a lot of names: business analyst, power user, Excel jockey, Tableau, or Power BI guru these days, departmental analyst, data lieutenant, data mashup artist, and sometimes data scientist, although there is a difference between a data analyst and a data scientist, and we'll talk about that in a second. For the most part, a data scientist has a lot more formal training in computer science and programming and statistics. So the typical role of an analyst is that they're hired by a department head and they report to that department head and they answer that department head's ad hoc business questions using data. So they're kind of like, they're in the back pocket of the department head to answer questions on demand. So what are the ideal skills for a data analyst? Well, as I kind of hinted at earlier, curiosity about the data and the desire to explore it, I think is really important. It's also, if they're going to solve problems, they need to be able to think critically and be good problem solvers. Take a business question, turn it into a hypothesis, and then think critically how to solve it. They absolutely positively need strong communication skills, because it's one thing to be able to analyze data. It's another thing to be able to communicate the results. And if you can't do that, you're basically worthless as a data analyst. Both on the input side, understanding what the question is, and on the output side, delivering the answer. So they need some technical skills, like writing SQL and understanding statistics. Although I've come across a number of analytics managers who say, they've hired analysts without SQL knowledge. If the person is bright and ambitious, as a lot of these analysts are, they typically can pick up the technical skills pretty easily. It's the interpersonal skills that are tough to teach and cultivate. They also need to be able to apply descriptive, diagnostic, and predictive analytics to solve these business problems. All right, so a little bit more detail.
What would you add? Have thick skin to that? You got to have thick skin. Be willing to take a beating.
As an analyst, yes, and explain why.
Well, I think to get to consensus, you've got to constantly be challenging the status quo, and then be able to absorb that criticism and then turn it into something that helps both sides come to the middle. So you got to be politically savvy to some extent. So
okay, fair enough.
Yeah, Mike, I I'd just add to that that based on Wayne's question about are they just order takers? If they're not, then they need to have that thick skin like you're describing. Yeah.
Good point, Dave.
Yeah, I find that the business people just oftentimes are just so used to telling the analysts what they want, down to, the color of the ink, and where this chart should be positioned on the paper, that they may get offended if the analyst push backs and ask them simple questions like, what are you trying to accomplish, right? But I've seen some analysts and directors of analytic centers of excellence who push back in a big way, and we'll talk about that in a second. So analysts, the job actually spans a lot of capabilities, and it can be pretty diverse. I know in a lot of organizations where the data maturity is pretty low, the analysts are really just glorified report writers. So they're down here on the left, writing reports, doing descriptive analytics for the most part, just pulling data about what's already happened. A good financial analyst or sales or marketing analyst, they're mashing up data from different sources. They're creating custom groupings. They're doing cross-functional analysis, answering some pretty hard questions, about pricing or commissions and incentives or anything like that. And then, of course, at the high end, we have data science, which applies statistics and machine learning to questions to do more predictive and prescriptive type analytics. So a data analyst can span all of these, and in fact needs to. I've talked to folks who run really strong data science shops. In fact, the guy who ran the data science team at Netflix, and he says he requires all his data scientists to still write dashboards because he thinks that's a good exercise for them to be doing on occasion. A data scientist typically needs a little bit more formal training than a data analyst, more training in statistics, as I said, and computer science. So why should we focus on data analysts? Why do I think they're so important? Why am I talking about them here today? I do think they're an under-optimized, under-managed, underutilized resource in most organizations. But that shouldn't be that way because they are the most active users of data. They know your data inside and out. And I assume I'm talking mostly to, data managers and analytics managers, probably at the enterprise level. Is that true, Mike?
We've got a fair number of practitioners on the call, from CIO to practitioner, and yeah, but yes, I would say a lot of managers on the call.
Yeah. So I'm mainly talking to the managers, but I'm sure if there's analysts out there, they'll gain a lot from this as well. So the analysts are the most active users of data, and they're the ones you really want to turn to when you start building and modeling your data warehouse or even your data lake to really understand what data you need, how it should be presented, things like that. Because they're so vested in data, they are your potentially biggest political assets or your biggest political liability. So it pays to treat them well and get them on your good side, because then they can go to bat for you if you're running a data analytics organization or program and help you get the funding you need to deliver, stronger resources and capabilities for the company as a whole. And if you don't deliver what they need, boy, they can really make your life miserable, because they do have the ear of these departmental leaders. Importantly, they're a bridge to the business. A lot of them, as I said, are embedded in the business. They can be your eyes and ears of what's going on there. They can be your first line of support when gathering requirements for a cross-functional application you need to build at the enterprise level. They can be your first line of support in fostering data literacy. They can provide those informal channels of support that can really help business users gain the skills and knowledge they need to be more effective with self-service tools. I mentioned they're the leading edge of requirements, foster data literacy, and this is one thing that executives don't really know. These folks are collectively expensive. You may only see one or two here or there, but if you look around the organization, do a complete inventory, which is one of the first things I do when I go into an organization. for consulting purpose, I say, well, do you have an inventory of all the analysts out there in the field who are touching data and doing analysis? And of course, the answer is usually no. So we do as best we can create an inventory. And we did this at a university, and we came up with 87.5 data analysts, some full-time, some part-time, some more on the data engineering side, some more on the data science side, but 87.5, that is a lot of people and a lot of money if you added it all up, but it doesn't exist anywhere in the P&L, right? So a lot of times we go to the executives and say, hey, you need a data strategy to get the most value out of these analysts that you're already paying and not getting a lot of value from.
Was that 0.5 a part-time job or just somebody who did it really poorly?
No, it's usually someone who is in a department and, they're looking around for someone who can build a report for something. And a person raises their hand and says, oh, I'll do that. It was like my son, he was doing in a fundraising department and they needed a dashboard. So he said, oh, that sounds fun. Let me go do it. So he ended up becoming their go-to person for data and analytics type things. So that's more of a part-time person. Okay, let's talk about how to align data analysts. So if they're scattered throughout the organization, it's really hard to align them. And this creates all kinds of problems for organizations because when analysts are going at their own rules, guess what happens? They spawn all these reports with conflicting data. And that drives the executives crazy to no end because they can't get a unified answer to simple questions like, how many customers do we have? What was our profit last quarter? Well, they may get that one from the finance department. So anyway, aligning these data analysts is very important for your own sanity and for the success of your program. So we've created this organizational framework that shows how to do that, as well as essentially how to run and organize a data and analytics program overall. So there's two components. In the red, that's your typical enterprise data and analytics team. And these are the folks I'm kind of addressing this presentation to. These are technical specialists in data or analytics, data engineering, BI, but they're domain generalists, right? They don't know the business all that well. They certainly don't know functional areas well at all. On the other side are the departmental data analysts. They're technical generalists, so they know how to use, build reports and dashboards. They may know a little SQL, enough to get by, but they're domain specialists. They know the business really well, especially if they've been in that role for a year or two. So those departmental analysts, their job is, as I said earlier, report to the business unit leaders, build local reports and dashboards to answer questions quickly, right? And not have to wait in line for the enterprise team to do it, which is great. The enterprise team doesn't really want to build those local reports anymore. And the last 5 years, we've seen them offload that in entirety. So their job today really is to focus on managing enterprise data. That's really data that's shared across 2 or more functional areas. Ingest it, clean it, integrate it, and then make it available for the departments to model it and leverage it. They also still need to build stuff, build applications, mainly the cross-functional applications that no one department's going to build. And they need to support the data analysts, and we'll get into that. I think this is a really unsung part of what this enterprise team needs to do. And finally, they need to deploy Tiger teams or SWAT teams. These are cross-functional, cross-trained groups of folks, data engineer, BI developer, data business analysts typically, who will go in and build something very quickly or prototype it for a department. And you can notice there's this dotted line between the two, right? In most organizations, there's no line. These two don't talk to each other, but I'm putting forth here the notion that there has to be some kind of relationship between these two groups. So what does that dotted line look like? So For its part, the enterprise team I think, should hire or help hire, have input into the hiring of these data analysts. They should help train those data analysts and evaluate the performance of those data analysts. Because guess what? The departmental leader doesn't know what a data analyst should be. They don't know what to look for in a data analyst typically. And they don't know how to train them or evaluate them. Really, that is something that an enterprise team can help with and do it at scale across multiple departments. The enterprise team also should convey best practices and standards. What are the standard data sets that you as department analysts should go after, right? We should have that managed in our data warehouse. We should show you where that warehouse is. And today we should have a data catalog that's been curated so you know exactly what data to go get. And all that tribal knowledge that used to be in the heads of these departmental analysts are now baked into annotations and curations within the data catalog. But also just, what tools do we use? How do we go about interfacing with business people? How do we publish reports? How do we govern them? All that stuff needs to be conveyed. Otherwise, who's going to do it? The analysts have to figure it out themselves, and each figures it out differently, right? And then finally, they need to coach and support the analysts. And part of that is providing a career path so they feel that they have some way to advance in this organization and don't feel buried in the basement somewhere. And their only way out is to get recruited into another organization. Now, conversely, the departmental analysts, they offload local development, as we said, so the enterprise team doesn't have to do it. Now, there's always some departments that don't have analysts or kind of work for them. But in general, the trend is for the departments to build their own reports and dashboards, especially the ones that they only will be using. They can also help the enterprise team identify and consolidate requirements for bigger cross-functional applications. And as I said earlier, promote data literacy by just supporting and helping the people that sit around them in the department. Now, on top of this structure, it's really important that there's some cross-functional oversight, because the blue and the red boxes really is the essence of the data analytics program for an enterprise. But this program, which can spend millions and millions of dollars, if you add up all the expenses of the enterprise team and the departmental teams, needs some oversight. And I liken this to a board of directors for data and analytics. Call it usually an analytics council. It's comprised of managers of analysts, typically the analysts and managers in each of the departments who have a vested interest in this enterprise resource and getting the most out of it for their department. They serve on the board. They review the strategy that the enterprise team presents. They refine it. They recommend it for funding to the executive team. They can also be part of a project prioritization team that ingests requests for new projects, analyzes them, and approves them. They can also be part of a governance team that defines standards and practices and tools and things like that. So all very important things. We do a lot of work in this area. It's kind of this whole other overlay to your data environment. You need like a metadata environment that sits on top of everything, of all the data that you deliver. And without that oversight, and the oversight's really on the metadata, you're not going anywhere. Now, below this, you also need cross-functional forums. This is especially helpful for data analysts. Gets them out of the basement, gets them talking to each other, sharing tips and tricks and code. Can be in person and virtual, like we're doing now. And ideally, and we'll talk about this later, there's a shared platform for all of the analysts throughout the enterprise that promotes collaboration, learning, and reuse. So we'll get back to that in a bit. But I want to talk a little bit more about this dotted line here and what that really means. Because there's many ways to kind of structure that dotted line from an organizational perspective. these are the 4 primary ways of structuring that dotted line. And we'll go through each of these quickly. So the first one that's the most common I've been referencing is this decentralized model where all the analysts are hired by the departmental leader. They sit in the department, they're managed by the department head, and they're paid by the department. And this is a good model in many ways because the analysts are like dropped dead in the center of this business domain, and they learn that domain very quickly and its data. And the departments control their own destiny. They have this data analyst or analyst at their beck and call. They don't have to wait in line with, for enterprise resources to come answer business questions for them. But there are problems, and you've probably confronted these. Sometimes the departments don't hire the right types of analysts. They don't last too long. They don't deliver much value. The analysts aren't managed or coached, so they don't feel like they're advancing in their career. They're isolated, prone to attrition, and from a CFO perspective, there are no economies of scale. There's a lot of redundancy in the system, as I showed in that inventory of the university. So a lot of CFOs and CEOs, when they finally realize how many data analysts there are wandering around their organization, taking a salary, they flip to the complete opposite extreme. They go to this department, take them from the departments, then put them on a central team, and they sit them at corporate. They report to a corporate, analytics center of excellence. They're managed by a corporate group, and they're paid by corporate, right? And then they're the shared service that all the departments then can come to and get their analytics questions answered, right? There's some benefits. There's economies of scale, better efficiency. You can have all the analysts, you know who they are, you can manage them. They can work together collaboratively on problems. They can rotate through assignments more easily. But there's one huge problem, actually a lot of problems, but the biggest is once you pull them out of the departments, they lose all that valuable domain knowledge. They don't know the business. So when they go in and try and solve a business question, guess what? It takes them a lot longer to figure it out, and oftentimes they get it wrong. And another problem is that to get even resources to answer a question, department heads have to wait in a long queue, which they do not like to do. They don't want to lose control. So guess what? Even though there's a central group, oftentimes the more ambitious department heads will go and hire their own analysts on the slide, maybe call them something different so no one notices. And now you've got even more analysts than you had when you started, and more fragmentation and potential conflict of data and reports. So we've seen companies flip-flop between these two models. They try one, they get to the end of the road with that, they hit the problems, and they flip to the other. They try that, they get to the end of the road, hit the problems, and they flip-flop them back and forth like a metronome. The smarter companies, and we're seeing more and more companies recognize that you need to federate, right? You need to do something that's somewhat in the middle, that gets the best of both worlds. And there's 2 approaches up here I've mentioned: the decentralized coached approach, and then the centralized aligned approach. So the decentralized coached approach is where the analysts still sit in the department, they still report to the department head. So for political reasons, it's kind of hard to wrest them away from the department head, but they're managed by the corporate team. So there's someone at corporate who's assigned to manage the analysts in all these departments. I've seen this work pretty well. And they're still paid by the department. Although the department may have to pay the corporate team kind of a little bit of an excise tax to cover the cost of that manager who's sitting at corporate. The other model is to have your analysts sitting centrally, but assigned to an individual department where they may spend 2 or 3 days a week. They're still managed by that corporate analytics manager, and they're paid by the department typically. Although they could be paid by a corporation or maybe split down the middle. And there's many variations between these 2 federated models. But the benefits are that you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get economies of scale. The analysts get domain knowledge because they're working and assigned to an individual department. They can rotate through domains, and they're managed, and they can then work collaboratively. Some of the problems are mostly political. The departments have to cede some control. They may have to pay some extra money. And there are cases where, the department just can't get what it needs from a centralized resource. So a lot of companies have a mix of all of these models, to be honest with you. But this should be a conscious decision of which model will work best with your organization and its culture. Comments on that one? If not, I'll just keep moving on. I stunned him into silence.
There's almost 40 people on. Somebody's got to have something to pitch in there. Don't be shy.
That's a lot to absorb, though. Trying to figure out how does your company operate now, and how should it operate? This is a hard one. Well, let me keep going. We can take questions at the end too. All right, how to train data analysts. This is really, really important. I wrote a book a number of years ago. I interviewed Ken Rudin, and at the time he was director of analytics at Zynga. And then he went on to become director of analytics at Facebook and Google. And he became kind of like this savant, analytics savant in Silicon Valley. He went around consulting with all these organizations, bringing all these pithy little aphorisms like you see here. Focus on questions, not answers. He used to say the answers are easy. It's coming up with the right question that's the hard part. Focus on impacts, not insights. Analysts tend to focus on insights and how cleverly they can use data to answer questions. But the point is, if you come up with an insight that the business doesn't adopt, there's no point to it, right? So he actually incented his analysts not on their insights, but on moving the needle for the business and helping the business achieve its objectives for which the business was incented. In fact, his analysts had the same incentives as the business, which they thought was at first incredibly unfair. And their reasoning was, well, if we come up with an insight and they don't adopt it, that's not our fault. So you can't blame us if we don't move the needle for the business. And Ken would say, well, no, I don't buy that at all. You have to be astute communicators. You have to be able to persuade people to adopt your insight, because if you can't persuade them, even and it's to their self-interest, then you've lost the battle as an analyst. And be consultative. Don't be an order taker. So try to understand exactly what they're trying to accomplish, and not just do exactly what they want. Because sometimes they don't know. In fact, a lot of times they don't know what they don't know. And you as an analyst with your domain knowledge and hopefully cross-functional knowledge knows a little bit more about the business in some cases than they do. So the goal is not to produce actionable insights. The goal is to produce results. I mean, actionable insight, that's kind of a buzzword these days. But you need to go one more step. You need to have insights that the business acts on. So what questions should analysts ask the business? I feel like they need to be trained as a journalist, like I was. And, just ask endless questions, the 5 W's, who, what, where, when, why. And actually, it's not just those, but it's why, 5 times, why. Then you'll get to the root cause of what they're trying to really accomplish. More than what they're trying to accomplish, once you find that out, you have to figure out, well, what's it worth to you? How much would this change the business from a profit or loss perspective? So in other words, is this a big insight or a small insight? If it's too small, it may not be worth your time as a data analyst to work on it. Third, what actions will you, the business person, take if you get the answers to this question, right? So it's one thing to have a hypothesis as a business person. It's then one thing to get answers to business questions, and a whole nother thing to act on it, right? Sometimes that takes a lot of political willpower and connections to actually take an insight and put it into action. may require process re-engineering, may require new software. So acting on an insight is not always easy. So understand what the implications are before you take on a project. And fourth, are you ready to implement the actions? So there's a person who was the director of analytics at a large financial firm, and she would say to business people, if you are not ready to implement actions based on the insights we give you, we're not going to do this project, because what's the point? You come back to us when you're ready to actually take some action on this insight. The whole point, again, is to move the needle. Now, on the flip side, you've taken on a project, you've generated an insight, now you have to communicate it to the business. Most important thing for an analyst to do is put all of your insights on one slide, because our tendency is to muck it up, right? And create a novel, which the business has no interest in reading or sitting through or listening to. They really just want you to tell them how you interpreted the question and what was the answer you came up with. So at the top of the slide, state the question or hypothesis. At the bottom, provide the conclusion with supporting data as evidence. But never, never, never describe the steps that you got from hypothesis to the insight. The business really doesn't usually have any interest. Okay, that's kind of like a little data analyst manifesto, I think. All right, technology for data analysts. Everybody still with me?
I am.
Good, 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 good. It's hard to see. I see round circles that are full of colors, but no faces.
There's a couple of
Okay.
questions coming in as well. We'll hit those at the end, Wayne.
Okay. So what does a data analyst do, right, to get an answer to a business question? Well, I think it's this basic workflow. First they discover, you got to go find the data that will answer this question, profile it to see if it has the attributes you need, take a sample of it, validate the quality, and then if they use it, then annotate, leave behind those breadcrumbs for others who are coming after you, where they can just quickly learn the value of this data set or its quirks so that they know how to use it more efficiently than perhaps you were able to. Today, we provide a data catalog and a business glossary to help in this discovery process. The next step is prepare. So once you have your data, then we want to typically combine it, join it, massage it, format it, query it, calculate it, enrich it. And we're typically doing, using data preparation tools there, like an Alteryx or Tableau Prep. Excel we used to use a lot. Then once we have the data, we've prepared it, and then we can analyze it, group it, filter, sort it, visualize it, model it. So we're going to use our analysis tools like Tableau, Power BI, and even AutoML tools like Data Robot that allows data analysts to do data science without all the statistical background. And then finally, we want to share those insights. So we typically create a report or a dashboard, allows us to share it, promote it, distribute it, even embed it into other applications if it proves popular. So we'll use BI tools for that, governed BI tools. So hopefully you agree with this workflow. I'm sure it's always more nuanced in any particular case, but until recently, you had to use a different tool for each of these steps, which is kind of a pain in the neck, right? But what we're seeing now, and the vendors saw a long time ago, is that you really need all of these functions to be integrated within a single platform or workbench, which I call self-service analytics. Entire end-to-end flow for a data analyst. So we're starting to see that from most of the vendors out there are infringing on a turf of adjacent vendors like Tableau, had this great partner in Alteryx until it launched Tableau Prep, which is a direct assault on Alteryx business, core business. Of course, Alteryx in turn is now beefing out its analytics capability, and both of them are adding data catalogs and all of the functionality that you see here, reporting, AutoML, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all coming together, and which is good news. That's only half the battle. I think this kind of workbench needs to be embedded in what I'm calling a multi-user data analyst platform that supports this workflow, but supports it in a group environment so that all your data analysts in an organization can work together, even though they're working on separate problems. So what are the components of this platform? It does have a catalog, not just for finding data sets, but also for publishing data flows and reports so that analysts can go in and reuse code instead of recreating it from scratch, which they often do. It can make them much more efficient. It should also allow them to do social things on the platform, to comment, rate, follow, share, have discussions and dialogues with their other fellow analysts who may be in different departments. It also should allow curators or administrators to kind of configure this environment and add guardrails to prevent things from getting fragmented. And we'll talk about this in a second. And finally, it should support interactions directly with business users and support the workflow between user requests and the data analysts. You can call it a ticketing system, but one that's geared specifically for data and analytics. So that's what I think is coming next. We're seeing the advent of the workbench. I think now we're going to start to see the advent of this multi-user platform. So let's talk a little bit about self-service. We've been on this almost 30-year journey of self-service in our space. So back in the 1980s and 90s, 1980, let's just say, IT team did everything, right? They got the data, they cleaned it, massaged it, modeled it, and built the reports and dashboards for everybody. But in the 1990s, we started to see the advent of desktop querying reporting tools like Crystal and MoLab tools like Arbor, Essbase, and the business now could actually create its own reports and even cubes. And the IT team still did all the rest. But in the 2010s or so, we started seeing the advent of self-service BI tools like Tableau and Power BI. Now the business can not only do its own reporting, it can build its own dashboards and do its own visualizations and analysis. IT team is still responsible for providing all the data. And that's a huge bottleneck right there. So the next step has been giving data analysts, and they're pretty much the recipients of all this self-service evolution, giving them data prep tools so that they can go grab their own data and mash it together. And that leaves the IT team with the ingestion process and integration process from source into a lake or a warehouse. But even now, we're starting to see the advent of self-service data pipeline tools that allows data analysts, business users to create their own pipelines and data repositories without IT's help. So this is a wonderful thing if you're a data analyst and want liberation from IT, full and total liberation. We're there, but some of you may realize that there is a downside to self-service. Like every analyst is empowered to do their own thing. Well, that's what they do. And they create this tsunami of artifacts, reports, dashboards, models, visualizations that are completely conflicting and overwhelm the users. They create spread march silos. The executives can't get an answer to a simple question. The users don't know which report to use. No one trusts the data except if they create it themselves. And anyone who's trying to piece this stuff together is doing a lot of work and rework. So there's a big downside to self-service. And we spend a lot of times helping organizations come up with a self-service strategy that doesn't create this tsunami, which I imagine a lot of you are experiencing. So, how do you avoid this? Well, the traditional answer is to, you need a governance process, whether it's for reports or data sets through a catalog or through model management for AI, ML. You need some kind of a process. Now, if you talk about reports, and dashboards, that's what analysts generate typically to publish their insights. You need some kind of a report process or governance process like is depicted here. So at the end of the process, you get this stamp or seal of approval that gets attached to your report or dashboard or chart. And those little seals are very powerful agents of change because the business users really glom onto those. They begin to expect to see them, and they won't use reports or dashboards that don't have those seals on them. Now, the only way this governance process works is if it's agile, and unfortunately, it's not always agile, but we still have to do it. But I do think there are some things coming down the road that will allow us to fast track this governance, and I'm calling this data architecture as a service. I'm just starting to develop this concept of data architecture service. It's where you build architecture into your self-service tools that function as guardrails to keep data analysts from breaking the rules, breaking the standards, using non-standard data sets, or publishing them if they haven't been approved yet, or whatever it is. In fact, it may start with just making sure they don't join data incorrectly and they're writing proper SQL queries, right? So what is data architecture as a service? Well, it's a play off of software as a service, infrastructure as a service, all that. So like those things that abstract infrastructure or platform, data architecture as a service abstracts data architecture, the rules, the guidelines, and the flows required to keep things aligned and in sync. So why do you do it? Well, data analysts can create data pipelines and their own repositories quickly without spawning data silos. And isn't that been the problem or the challenge that we've been trying to solve for the last 30 years? How do you allow the business to create data silos that don't break the business, right? So they're non-siloed data silos. How architects build guardrails into no-code, low-code data pipeline tools. Basically, we're creating reusable blocks that analysts can reuse they've been essentially certified blocks for reuse, whether it's code or it's data sets or APIs or what have you. And then architects will review the output. There's some tools coming on the market that are starting to do this. I'm starting to look into this now. I think this is a very promising area. It's going to help facilitate the culmination of self-service by giving business the ability to create its own data sets with impunity. So we can talk more about that in a bit. So the final section is how to retain data analysts. So I said they're usually young. They're usually ambitious. When they get into an organization, they kind of want to see the ladder in front of them. They want to see how to get to the next rung and maybe even the next several rungs and where that's going to take them. So I do think it's really important when you have enough data analysts in your organization to create a career path for them. So I spent a little bit of time a number of years ago creating this it's kind of like a org chart / career path chart / peer relationship chart. So I won't go into all the details here, but from a data analyst perspective, you can see they're positioned right here, and data scientists right here. They're in this plum spot in the organization. They sit right between the business and the technology side. So they have a good grasp of both, which makes them very powerful. We call them purple people. They're not blue in the business or red in IT. They're kind of a blend of both. And that's a really powerful position to be in. And as a result, it gives them many places they can go in an organization. So they can stay on this analyst track and be an analyst until they retire, and maybe even move up and to become, with additional training, become a data scientist. Move up the ranks. Every organization should have 1, 2, or 3 levels of analyst mapped out, and what the skills and requirements and responsibilities are at each level. So this is that's a career track right there. Or they could go on the management track. So instead of doing the analytics work, manage the analytics work and become an analytics director or even a CDO. They could very well go on the business track. A lot of data analysts are fairly akin to product managers. They work oftentimes very closely with product managers, supporting them, and it's not infeasible that they can't step into that role. To do good data analysis, you need to know your product and your data inside and out. They could go to the technology side and become a BI developer, even maybe a data engineer if that was an inclination of theirs. Or they could go on the data governance track. Data governance needs good people who have both a strong sense of the business and technology. So working to do this, you would need to work with your HR department, define these levels and these paths, and then implement a program to teach analysts about this, and probably a mentorship program to get them where they want to go. Finally, I think it's also important, whether you have a career pathways or not, is to try to rotate your analysts through different departments so they don't get stagnant and buried in a single one. So for instance, here you have a level 1 data analyst. You assign them to a department with existing analysts, spend 1 to 2 years in that department, and rotate. Do that 2 or 3 times, and then sit down with them and say, okay, what career path do you want to go to? You can stay as an analyst. That's great. You love this job. Perfect. You've got a lot of opportunities there. You can go on the business side. You can go on the technical side. You can do that with level 2 data analysts. They're going to be running a team of analysts, no doubt, at that level. And from there, they could become director of analytics in the management ranks, go into data science, or go into product management. And you can do the same with data scientists as well. So in summary, and I guess we're at the end of our time too, guys. It's speaking a long time here. Sorry about that. So data analysts are linchpins to your data analytics strategy. They're the bridge to the business. They're political assets or liabilities, depending on how you treat them. They're source of data requirements, key to data literacy. Should align data analysts by creating a federated reporting structure, an analytics council and community of practice. Empower them by training them on proper business communications, give them self-service tools with guardrails, and retain them by creating career paths and rotating them through different departments and offering a mentorship program. So with that, I'm done. It's almost top of the hour. So usually leave 10 minutes for Q&A. I guess I got carried away today, Mike.
Yeah. Well, no, it's good. Thanks. We started a little bit late, so you're good. And there are a couple people that have said thank you. They got to drop for another meeting, but I think the prevailing question is great information. How do I get a hand on it? And I know this is your business, Wayne. So what's your policy for sharing this information? We did record the session, but we won't. I want to know how you.
And I'll send this to you. You can distribute it.
Okay. Excellent. That will be popular. Anybody else venture a comment or question? I think we had.
I'm just going to say, great insights, Wayne. So much of it really hits home.
I had a question, Wayne. You mentioned about rotating the data analytics people through different departments on one hand, but on the other hand, you talked about them losing their ability to know their data by having that happen. Where do you reach a compromise in that scenario?
Well, when you rotate through, you're picking up a new domain. It's just when you move to corporate, you have no domain unless you're very well aligned. So you become much more valuable when you have multiple domains under your belt and can do cross-functional analysis. And you're not siloed. You may be less siloed than the business. See, the more you can see what's the bigger picture, the more valuable you're going to be as a data analyst. The more you can bring to bear on questions that the business has.
Thanks, Wayne.
So move around like a rolling stone, right? Move around and pick up, or maybe more like a snowball. Pick up information as you roll around, and you keep becoming more valuable.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Any insights for retail? You said a lot of these practitioners, these analysts, end up being young and ambitious. I'm thinking Gen Y. This is certainly not about retaining your workforce, but giving them a career path. You mentioned what else? Any other insights about keeping young, ambitious talent happy and?
Well, yeah, I think it's, don't let them get too isolated. Make sure they can collaborate with other analysts. I think these folks want to keep learning. They want to keep being challenged. You got to give them new challenges frequently. And that's going to keep them interested and engaged. The first time they feel disengaged or not challenged, then they're ripe for attrition.
Your idea of having a common platform that the analysts across departments can engage on kind of facilitates that in a way.
Yeah, that's part of that. That's why you want to do it, is to keep them engaged, help them learn who other analysts are, learn from them, foster mentorship. Yeah.
Less duplication of effort, more
Yep.
standards.
Reuse.
What else, anybody? This